So I'll read a little bit about, I know my sister's watching this, so she's gonna probably cry. I dedicated this book to my sister, actually, and I'm gonna read a little bit about her and I's relationship. Is this how we're good? Go ahead and read. Okay, cool. For years, my sister Alyssa and I didn't get along very well, and I'm talking 20 plus years. We got under each other's skin, and there were times we couldn't even be in the same room together. When we were younger, we fought with words and fists, and once there was an outright war with a plastic spoon from Dairy Queen. I'm not sure if you guys have Dairy Queen, but it's an ice cream place. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I was an aggressive, bratty, know-it-all older sister who loved to instigate drama, and Alyssa was really angry and on edge most days, which only fueled the instigator and me more. There were also some pretty big jealousy issues. Alyssa was thin and an incredible athlete, where I was chubby and could barely run a lap around the school gym. Getting good grades and making friends came really easily for me, while Alyssa struggled to do both at school. We wanted what the other had, and because of that, we found it really hard to find common ground. The one thing we did have in common was our pain. My sister has endometriosis too, but because we rarely talked or got along, neither one of us knew just how much pain the other was in. I didn't even know Alyssa had been diagnosed until years later through a conversation with my mom. And even after learning about her diagnosis, we went through cycles of hating each other and then almost liking each other. But then something would happen and we'd start hating each other all over again. I didn't think it would ever be possible to have a healthy relationship with my sister, but then it happened. The same year I started to change my diet to manage my endo, Alyssa did too. During this time, we began to open up communication between us and send links to cookbooks that were helping us or articles we found supporting our new lifestyle. As Thanksgiving rolled around that year, we knew there wasn't going to be much that we could eat at our family's dinner, so we decided to hop on the phone, something we rarely did, and plan some dishes together. We had so much fun strategizing our Thanksgiving menu that I felt like I was talking to an old friend. Before we hung up, Alyssa said something I'll never forget. She said, "I feel like this is our first Thanksgiving together as sisters." I will always remember that moment because things really changed for us after that. We began to bond in a way we never had before, and Alyssa is now one of my closest friends. We text and talk all the time. Instead of being jealous of each other, we cheer each other on. She runs marathons and I can still barely run a lap around the gym. We were able to reflect on our childhood and see all the things we did have in common back then. We were able to talk about our endo and not feel alone. But the most important thing that we have in common now is that we're no longer in so much pain. We're both managing our endometriosis with the tools you're about to learn in this book. And now that we are managing our pain, we can clearly see how most of our issues and anger towards each other was a result of that pain. So that part of the book I just wanted to read because I think so much we talk about the physical pain of endometriosis, but sometimes what's not shared is how it impacts our relationships and career, our self-worth, and so much our mental health. And thank you to the BBC. They did that amazing study that showed how much it impacts mental health. So in the book, I really explore that relationship component because oh my gosh, it impacts it so much. And I think, I include studies that show too, like just how the chronic pain can affect our personalities and how we navigate each day.
That's really beautiful. I really appreciate what you say about emotional pain as well, and the way things like emotions and food have a way of impacting your body and the way you feel in the world, and how that has this sort of vicious impact when you're in pain and you're feeling, rubbish on every other area of your life, including your relationships. And something I think about endo, which people don't talk about a lot, is how it often happens to you as a child, as you're starting to go through puberty and as you're learning and who you are and your body's developing. So I think that was really beautiful to hear you touch on that tonight.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Our next reader then is Karen.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, so this is my book. This is the American version and the UK version. Basically, I'm going to read a little bit, and basically what you need to know about it is that follows a Norwegian woman who lives in New York backwards through her life for about 20 years. And I'm going to read a little snippet from the very beginning and a little bit from the middle, where she's quite sick, so it's a little bleak, but I do want to say that I worked really hard on making it a fun book to read, hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to read the very first paragraph of the book first. For years, I've considered it an established fact that the female body is a pain in the ass. Despite all its unique talents, from youth, it's constantly racked by hurricanes, snow, and rain, by cramps and pains, premenstrual craziness, menstrual craziness, post-menstrual craziness, pill-related craziness, waves of uncontrollable rage and sadness, fluctuating weight and libido, urinary tract infections, yeast infections, not to mention the smorgasbord of mind-boggling changes that is pregnancy. There are so many things that swell, ache, cramp, and droop, so many places an eponymous cancer can settle, breasts, uterus, ovaries, and so many illnesses that are specifically female. The male body seems like a sunny campsite in comparison. I'm making a leap. The gastrointestinal specialist is in his 70s, and I can tell the whole integral health thing is a little new to him. His office is pleasant, with soft carpets and Native American sand paintings. My general practitioner, who referred me to him, sent him 46 pages on me that are up on his screen. It's some stuff from Norway and all the tests we did here. So you continue to improve, the doctor says. He quotes what I said last time. I can't remember that I was worse, or that I'm doing better now. But it's true. We've been testing some new drugs, and this last one seems to be working. I'm sleeping a little better, for one thing. Are you physically active? I run sometimes and do some yoga. I try to do it twice a week, but you run? He's clearly shocked. I try to. Before I go, he stops me to say I'm doing a lot better than he expected. You're exercising. You're going to school. Look at you, he says, beaming. I walk into the sunshine feeling my usual post-doctor fatigue, but I feel happy too. Third day on painkillers. I'm on my way to a specialist, immobile on an orange plastic seat on the D train. I realize the walk to the station was too much, and I'm completely drained. I don't think I can even stand up. I let my head fall back against the ad poster behind me and close my eyes, allow the train to rock me. So far, I've always managed to push myself just a little longer, as long as I need to go. By the time I arrive, I'll most likely make it up the stairs, but I probably shouldn't be running my life like this. I can't take it for granted. Everything crumbles. On the way to the station, I heard a nice melody from an open window. Spring. My head is churning as usual, both worsened and comforted by the codeine. Why do I draw the lightning out of the sky while others have a safe, clear road for years and years? The absolute worst thing is to be someone else's inspirational story, where they see you and think, everything is okay as long as I don't have what you have. Why should I give a shit whether you make the most of your blessed cream cake life? Then again, there's always someone who's worse off than me. I can't wait for the trouble to pass. I have to take the good times where they appear. As long as I can walk down the street and listen to music, make eye contact with people, wear my own clothes. As long as everyone is alive and healthy and I'm a certain measure of okay, not in too much pain and not deteriorating with a fixed end date. So shut up and feel lucky, damn it. Act immediately to protect feelings of happiness, peace, and calm when they appear. Knock on wood. Avoiding those bitter thoughts could be as easy as the express train gliding past the station without stopping. Don't go there. But it's already too much. It's too much before I even begin. So she's in the market for your book, Jessica.
Thank you, Karen. That's wonderful. I must say, yours is the first book of fiction I've ever read about endometriosis, and something that always struck me when I've read your book is the way you so perfectly capture the kind of interior monologue I think a lot of us will find really familiar. That idea of, you know, oh, people have it worse than you know, just try and find the positive, just keep going, the sort of things that we tell ourselves. But something else that was really stood out to me, especially with what you read tonight, I think people with chronic illness will recognize this idea of any sort of relief, the cyclical and kind of unending nature of the condition that we have. So, you know, if you have, as you say, PMS craziness, and then that breaks away, then your period comes, and then you have period craziness, as you say, but then it's things like, you know, taking codeine as pain relief, and then codeine giving you a headache. There's always like a side effect, there's always a consequence, and there's never very much relief. So I just think that kind of unending, almost like back-breaking monotony of pain and illness, and kind of, I think writing is something people want to be exciting, and I think what you managed to do so well is just get into the kind of raw emotional reality of living with this kind of condition, and I just found that really touching.
Thank you. That is really nice to hear. I think it is a lot of work, which I think is something that needs to be talked about, and yeah, like just keeping it going and appearing to be doing well, or, you know, all this stuff is very much in Jessica's book.
It is, absolutely. I think we'll talk about that more in a little bit, but both of your works really sit in conversation with each other in that regard, so I'm excited to get into that. And then our final reader for tonight is Lucia. So Lucia, please take it away.
Hello, thank you so much for having me, and both of those readings were so beautiful, and thank you, Kirstie. And as you said, Kirstie, I was just thinking about this. It was so beautiful reading Jessica and Karen's books kind of side by side, because particularly with that kind of internal monologue, Jessica was talking to some really great experts about that kind of thinking, and then Karen's novel has kind of these beautiful examples of how that works when you're sitting on the subway. And I thought that was so wonderful. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from my new book, which is coming out in September this year. It's called My Body Keeps Your Secrets, and it is about a lot of things. It's a combination of memoir and journalism about what it means to live in a body, and particularly what it means to live in a body that is structurally shamed or the subject of various different kinds of oppression. So there is a chapter in the book about pain, which I'm going to read from. So the book is kind of made up of polyphony of voices of people that I interviewed, women, trans and non-binary people from around the world, which makes up most of the book. This is what I'll read as an introduction to one of those chapters. Audre Lorde said in the 2004 collections, Conversations with Audre Lorde, pain is important. How we evade it, how we succumb to it, how we deal with it, how we transcend it. Medical professionals and scientists have recently made a series of breakthroughs in the study of what is now known as chronic pain. Doctors define chronic pain as pain that has afflicted the sufferer for more than 3 months. My own abdominal pain began in November 2009. That means that for about 11 years, it has technically been chronic rather than acute pain. Acute pain is the feeling that our culture usually associates with suffering. Acute pain is temporary. It is a broken ankle, a sports injury, a sore throat. It is a distress signal sent from a part of the body that is damaged, up through the nerves, along the spine and into the brain. When the physical problem is healed, the pain subsides. This is how we still far too often define and describe pain. But for many of us who live in pain, this narrative is achingly inaccurate. When there is physical damage to a tissue or organ and the nerve receives these pain signals, the purpose is for us to act on them. Rest, ice the injured ankle, seek medical care. But when those pain signals are sent and we do nothing, the nervous system becomes confused. It sends double the amount of pain messages and then triple. Before long, it is sending 10 times as many pain signals to the brain for the very simple reason that the regular amount is not having the desired effect. It is not keeping us safe. When we are ignored, we speak louder. This is why many chronic conditions can have peaks and troughs in terms of the amount of pain the sufferer experiences. The body will cycle through routines of sending an inappropriate amount of pain messages to the brain just to get the brain to take notice. The body knows something is wrong, but the brain has learned that women and people of marginalised genders are expected to cope with pain. As always, I have now learned the body wins out in the end. If we are experiencing acute pain but do not allow it to heal, the nervous system becomes overactive. But if that doesn't work, the neuroplastic brain actually creates a new neural pathway that is a constant pain feedback loop. It will mimic being in pain almost all of the time as a precautionary measure because it cannot trust its normal alarm system to get us to act. So the pain becomes chronic. It exists in the brain as a constant warning sign. Once pain is chronic, and this is the part that doctors are only just beginning to understand, it is not a symptom. It is its own disease. It is a neurological malfunction in its own right. It is not caused by a separate injury, but is an injury itself. So here's the kicker. Ignoring the pain of women, trans, and non-binary people does not only stop us from healing, it actually makes it more likely that the pain will become permanent. Does that make you angry? It makes me angry. Women and people of marginalised genders are 25% less likely to be given opioids when they present to an emergency department with acute pain. When they are given painkillers, they are given a lower dose than men reporting the same degree of pain. Women in pain wait an average of 16 minutes longer than men to be seen by a doctor. When women go to a doctor with a painful condition, the pain is much more likely to be dismissed as psychosomatic or a part of ordinary life. This is why it takes an average of 7 to 10 years for a person with endometriosis in the UK to be diagnosed and treated. Elaine Scarry wrote in her book, The Body in Pain, to be in pain is to have certainty. To hear that another person has pain is to have doubt. No one knows the feeling of being doubted better than a woman does. The actual function of acute pain is not to torment us, but to alert us to danger, Norman Doidge writes in his 2018 book, The Brain's Way of Healing. With chronic pain, however, because the alarm system has stopped working and because the person responding to it has begun to override its messages, to insist that they do not deserve the attention it is asking for, to question the legitimacy of their own bodies, is it any surprise then that so many patients of chronic pain are women? As the pandemic rages while I write, I'm thinking a lot about the language we use to talk about illness and pain. It is always a language of combat, of war. It is militaristic and individualistic and heavy with moral weight. Those who survive pain and illness are fighters, endowed with some mystic property that entitles them to ongoing life. This language is not only masculine in its own right, in its violence, but also in the sense that it imagines a definition of pain and illness that is acute and inherently temporary. The battle is won or it is lost. Either way, it ends. At some point, the fight is over. Not so for so many of us, too many. Not only are women much more likely to develop chronic pain conditions resulting from acute pain, but many of the hitherto untreatable chronic illnesses we contend with either primarily or exclusively affect women. For women, pain is not valiant and fleeting. It strikes me that my illness was the end of a battle for me in some ways, and not the beginning. I suffer deeply from my physical disability every day, of course. I'm not saying I don't struggle with it, but not in the way that the word battle evokes. Battle came before. The battle was the lie. It was waking up every day and pretending I was something other than I was, pretending I hadn't been hurt by the world when I had. When I got sick, that was my body giving up on the lie. Illness was the most honest state in which I've ever existed. In this way, it wasn't a battle at all. It was a relief. Pain that does not end is not a high-energy battle or a fight to the death. It is the most boring, mundane experience on earth. It is simultaneously traumatic and dull, something that should be extraordinary, but because of our lot has become so very ordinary for women and people of marginalised genders. Everything about pain and illness that disadvantages women, trans, and non-binary people is even more debilitating for people of colour. Black women are significantly more likely to develop chronic illnesses and chronic pain than white women, according to a 2018 study by the University of California, Berkeley. For too long, we have made the mistake of believing that illness is caused by personal behaviour. After living through my own illness and talking to so many people for this book, I'm convinced that this connection is imaginary. Illness is structural. The body breaks down under the stress of structural oppression. As Sinead Gleason writes in Constellations, the kingdom of the sick is not a democracy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lucia, for that. I'm very excited for this book to come out. Something, again, that struck me is how we've got 3 books here tonight, all in sort of, you know, different genres, but there's so much crossover between the themes and the content and the kind of life experiences that each of you are reflecting on. And I think that's something I've experienced with my own endometriosis. I've got severe endo, ovarian cysts, and fibroids. And something I've often experienced speaking to their patients, you know, whether that's in a sort of a health group or a kind of a chronic illness support group, or just someone, you know, a friend of a friend, we have very similar experiences of how we, you know, came to know that something was wrong, and the same experience of going to the doctor after doctor after doctor, being belittled, dismissed, and ultimately getting a diagnosis that was very, you know, hard won. At which point, I think patients often find themselves looking down the barrel of repeated surgeries, painful procedures, medication that doesn't work or has very severe side effects. I think that's a journey that a lot of us have experienced. So I think my first question for everyone tonight is, when did you first notice that your period pain wasn't normal, and how did the people around you act when you were suffering? Jessica, would you like to start?
I don't know if it's an American thing or what, but I've been crying this whole time. So thank you. It's like these pieces are so moving. I mean, I think what's so interesting is, you know, my mom had such terrible periods. So I just thought my painful periods were normal. So, you know, I had an interview the other day and someone asked me about my journey to get a diagnosis, and I didn't even have a journey to get a diagnosis because I wasn't even searching for one. I just thought that having painful periods, bleeding through your pants, passing out on your period, GI issues, I just thought this was the way of a period. So, I mean, I think that as much as I noticed I had painful periods, probably after my very first period, I didn't think that there was anything not normal about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. Mine was a very similar experience, coming from a long line of women who just suffered, and that was just how it was. Yeah. And so I didn't have my mom question. I mean, she would always pick me up on the first day of school. There was no question about my pain. It was just our norm. Yeah, I completely I agree with that. That was my experience too. Karen, what was your experience like? Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry. Good thing I noticed, or you said something. It's kind of a tricky question to answer for me, but the people who read my book, it does have my own experience in those ways, has a lot in common with my main character. But it's kind of the same with me. I have 2 sisters who also have endo, 2 older sisters, but I don't remember it being something that we really talked about. It was just like, life sucks sometimes. And so I didn't end up getting diagnosed until I was 29, by which point it was very, very bad. So, and I also had other health issues like food allergies, things like GI issues that were very easily explained away. And also like, there was always like, you're stressed, so you probably have stomachache because you're stressed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think a lot of people have. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Lucia, would you like to talk a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. Well, I had an interesting experience of this because I was a very serious athlete growing up, and so I got my period very, very late compared to everyone around me. So by the time I got it, when I was kind of 16 or something, or maybe 15, everyone, it just wasn't something that anyone talked about in my family or in my group of friends. And it was really debilitating, but like everyone else has said, I never thought that I could do anything about it. And then about 2 years after that, it started getting to the point where, as Jessica said, I would pass out and people would find me and I'd end up in an ambulance and then I'd end up in hospital. And I'd have all these other kind of things happening to my body. Like my body was just kind of in revolt. So from the first time I kind of realized that something was wrong was when I started getting admitted to hospital, and I would take months out of kind of uni and my life and everything. But all the doctors just kept diagnosing me with sexually transmitted infections, none of which I had. And I would just come in and they'd say, okay, you have acute pelvic pain, you probably have chlamydia, so we'll treat you for that, even though I didn't have it. And then they'd make horrible comments to me about my sex life and about my kind of lifestyle choices. And then I'd be back the next time and the same thing would happen. And it wasn't until 2 years after that when I was actually lying in hospital when a surgeon came in and said, I think I know what's going on. I think you have endometriosis, and then asked to do the surgery. And by that point, I had so many surgeries to kind of see what was going on. And I said no. I was just like, I'm done with this. I don't think there's any hope for me. And then he kept fighting for me to have this diagnostic laparoscopy. And then when he did that surgery, there was I had stage 4 endometriosis as well, and it was everywhere, and there was all sorts of fibroids and cysts going on. So yeah, I was very lucky that someone intervened at that point. And I just, until that point, had so many people kind of just tell me that my acute suffering was just a consequence of making bad choices.
Yeah. I think that's the experience a lot of people have had. Me as well, with the idea of going to, being an A&E and being told like, oh, you're just, your stomach hurts because you're just anxious, or being pushed down the route of having an anxiety disorder or an eating disorder because I couldn't keep food down. And even if I did have those problems, which I don't, there still wasn't any empathy or care for potentially having an eating disorder or an anxiety disorder. It was still very critical and quite cruel, I think, the treatment experience, which I think is common for a lot of people. One thing I want to talk a little bit about, and Jessica, you touched on this in your reading. I think I mentioned this a little earlier. With my experience of my period was I got it very young. I was about 10 or 11, and for me, I feel like that was a splintering in my childhood, where I was I had this childhood, and then something abruptly kind of stopped it, and I was sick and I was ill, and I kind of, I became very frightened of my body and what it was capable of doing to me, the pain it caused, being found, fainting and not being able to eat anything. And I just feel like I lost control, and it was a very upsetting, quite traumatic experience. I do feel like it was the end of my childhood. And I wonder if anyone here had a similar experience with that, and if you'd like to talk about that.
Yeah, it definitely, I've always had a lot of body dysmorphia and body issues, and I don't know, I blamed it on a lot of things, but it really wasn't until writing this book and just really researching it that I finally made more of a connection as to why I had body dysmorphia. And, so much of it is what I saw, and I thought that was causing it, but I also think it's how I felt in my body. Like when you just feel so bloated and inflamed, and then you look at yourself in the mirror, it's hard to see, I think, a normal body. And I also think when you're asked, every other day if you're pregnant because you're wearing a slightly form-fitting thing, then you start to think, am I just fat? Like, what is this body that I'm in? So I definitely think, in terms of the childhood, or in terms of how I saw myself, I think that endo has impacted that so much. And I wish that it wasn't until I started writing this book that I made that connection.
Yeah, I agree. I think you need a bit of distance maybe to be able to look back and see it a bit more clearly. And I wonder if, from my experience of that, was finally getting to the place where I felt comfortable with myself and myself as an adult, and knowing I have a condition and being more confident in my pain is real. And I was able to kind of deal with the kind of the day-to-day pain I was in, where I finally felt like that emotional pain came at me, and I could kind of look at that and see that for what it is. Now I wasn't so distracted by just surviving. Yeah. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh, did I was just saying it's something else to talk at therapy about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Karen or Lucia, did you have any thoughts on the idea of a period kind of disrupting your childhood?
I just wanted to say, just in response to what you were just saying, Jessica, that I'm having so many feelings just listening to both of you read and talking about this, or all three of you. And I think it's such an important point, how if you are constantly, I think Abby Norman has this wonderful sentence that I always quote, something like, with women, it tends to be that it's understood that women have pain because they're anxious, instead of they're anxious because they are in pain.
Yeah.
That isn't being taken seriously. And it's just, it can be really overwhelming to think about, like, how we are all so used to, like, placing ourselves in relation to, sometimes to other patients, or like, I'm the right kind of patient, I'm the right kind of endo patient, like, I'm not doing any of the wrong things, because we all have so many experiences of being blamed in different ways. And it always takes, like, hearing someone else talk about it makes it really real for me, even though I've even written a book about it. It's like none of it is a surprise, but then I am always surprised by the feelings I have anyway. Yeah, your question, I think I remember being extremely unhappy about getting my period. I remember in my very first period, I had terrible pain, and I was also, like, very embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And I had, like, a real sort of reaction to it. Like, I didn't want it to be happening, which makes sense in retrospect. And I think for me, I don't know if it's, my feeling from being in the US is that it's less like that there, but I don't know. But, like, talking about periods and stuff was not something that we really did, or that I ever did, at least. I was just so embarrassed by every single detail about it. So I tried to just, like, not know that it was happening for as long as I could.
Yeah. I went to school in the States as well, and my memory of it was that we were taught about periods at school a little bit, nothing about it ever going wrong, though. It was just kind of, this is what period is, it's great. And my experience with my peers was that everyone was so ashamed and mortified about it. It was just, periods were disgusting and no one wanted to talk about it. So there's never any chance to like share and have a bit of a discussion about what it's like to actually experience one beyond, oh, it's gross. And I think that's really deep-rooted misogyny that, women are subject to. Lucia, I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I had such a kind of crash course in all of the things that people expected of me as a young woman through the eyes of doctors, only because as I said, because growing up, I was an athlete and I was training all the time and I was competing all the time, and I was not a sick child and I had no acquaintance with illness. I used to brag to people that I had never been to hospital, which I still think probably jinxed it, because now I barely go 6 weeks without being in hospital. But I used to say all the time, like, I have this perfect, I have this system that works and I'm an athlete and it's all very good. And so that kind of sheltered me a bit, I think, from the expectations of teenage girls, and it sheltered me a bit from the conversations that were being had and all the body shaming that was happening. And then when I got sick, just after I got my first period, and then the pain got worse and worse and I ended up in hospital, those hospitalizations were the first time I really came face to face with how people treated teenage girls outside of my kind of very specific institutional sports setting. And it was shocking. I had always seen myself as someone who could handle pain and work through anything, all those things that you get taught. And then there were these doctors who were treating me like I might shatter if they, stepped too close to me. And I remember just seeing myself through the eyes of all these male doctors for the first time and understanding all of what I had kind of been a little bit protected from. So, and it just so happened that protection shattered at exactly the time that I got sick, because getting sick was what stopped me from being an athlete or being able to kind of do anything physical. So yeah, kind of all at once, my whole identity changed, and I went from being someone who I was quite proud of. I thought I was doing doing some good stuff. And then all of a sudden I was just being treated like this very kind of constitutionally weak, vulnerable, anxious person. And yeah, it was a very, and as you say, Kirstie, and, you know, and as we've all said, it's that there's a shift, something happens, you know, something just changes.
Yeah, that's massive. You must have felt your world imploded overnight when you experienced that, and at such a young age as well. It's very difficult. Yeah. I think that brings me to something really wonderful in Jessica's book, which I'll just read a really short extract from, which touches on what we were just talking about. Jessica writes, "The day you were diagnosed is a very significant day, but the day can also come with a lot of emotional questions. Why did it take me so long to be diagnosed? Why didn't my family and friends believe my pain? Why is this the first time I've ever heard the word endometriosis? And what does my future look like while living with this incurable condition?" I think there are questions a lot of us have asked ourselves, kind of, you know, sat there in the hospital room wondering what's going on. I wondered if you could talk a bit about your experience with something we all have brought up, the idea of being a good patient and getting the most as you can out of a doctor who maybe isn't inclined to believe us and believe our own perception of our body.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so tricky because I think so much in the chronic illness space, especially the endo space, we definitely villainize doctors a lot, and I think some of them should be. But at the same time, I think that we also need to look at the top. Like, for instance, in the United States, the American College of Gynecology, on their website, it still says that a hysterectomy is a treatment for endo. You know, and it still says that ablation surgery is just as good as excision surgery, and they're creating insurance codes. So there's one insurance code for the surgery. And so if you want an excision surgery in the United States, it can cost between $15,000 to $20,000. That is not practical for most people. So I think when we talk about the medical system and how these doctors are treating us, it's so tricky because I think so much of endo presents itself not as painful periods, right? So many of us have GI, 90% of people with endo have GI issues. So we're going to all of these specialists to try to find the answers. And as much as I hate that these doctors aren't listening to us, it's like they need the proper training too. Like, why, when you walk into a gynecologist's office, you get something on breast cancer and STDs, which I'm just appalled that Lucia was diagnosed with STDs multiple times. But where's the pamphlet on endo? It happens to 1 in 10 people with periods. Like, that is crazy. So I think the system needs to change even more than the individual doctors to start to believe us.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's just it's a very multi-layered issue, and I think you're right as you say that there are some great doctors out there, doctors doing brilliant work. I had surgery in December with the most empathetic, loveliest gynecologist I've been lucky enough to meet. But I think you're right that we remember the bad doctors the most because they upend our cars, send us down a rabbit hole of misdiagnosis and further pain and dismissal. So it's a tricky situation to be in when you are at your most vulnerable.
I think, do you mind if I just say something?
Of course, no, go.
I think Jessica's point about the kind of medical establishment and the training is such an important one, I think, because, you know, there are a lot of individual doctors who probably, you know, who aren't believing us and aren't taking things seriously, but even the people who want to, they exist in a system that really has institutionalized these beliefs. I spoke to some medical students for a podcast recently about this, and specifically about shame in medicine. And it was really interesting because what came out of our conversation was all the things that I was talking about, firstly kind of being in pain, and also my emotional reaction to being in pain, like feeling incredibly depressed, and feeling and struggling with really, really low moods, and catastrophizing, and, you know, all of those things that I brought up. They said that they kind of correlated exactly with the things that they were taught in medical school to ask patients about in a certain way. So they were saying that they are taught that they always have to preface questions about periods, for example, with you don't have to answer this, or I know this is, you know, something which in some ways is helpful, but actually what it does is it tells everyone in the room that we're entering a shame zone, and you shouldn't feel comfortable, that this is different from the other medical conversations we've had. And that was just an example I thought that was really interesting, in the way that all of these medical students had been trained in kind of treating certain things and periods, with a kind of big example, as just being different from everything else, and not being treated the same as they treat other medical conditions. And I feel like that speaks to the fact that, I feel like this has just been ingrained in the system for so long. And so even doctors with the best of intentions, as Jessica said, are kind of still being trained by a system that doesn't understand this disease very well at all.
Yeah, I think it's the writer Gabrielle Jackson, in her recent book, talks about how the female body is seen as the male body is seen as standard, and the female body is seen as somehow other to that. And I think that, I know that as a cis woman myself, going into gynecologist's office, I have an incredible privilege that I don't have to argue my case for being in the room, and that's not the case with patients who have endometriosis, who have uteruses, and they are non-binary or trans. So I think that there's just so many layers of inequality that can really come to a head in those examination rooms when you are feeling at your most vulnerable. And I think that it's really great that there's books like these, which you guys have written, that are really bringing these conversations out. Because when I started AIC in 2017, there was, it wasn't that long ago, but there really was not very much out there about endo. I remember the NHS website had a really short thing about, endometriosis it happens to women, and pregnancy, you might not be able to get pregnant, and it causes you to have painful periods. And since then, the conversation has really opened up, and I think that a lot of progress is being made, but there is really a long way to go.
Can I ask a question to everyone? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think I'm just so curious, because everyone is writing here about these things that are very heavy, and especially with our chronic illnesses. And I'll have to say, I felt way more at peace with my endo before I wrote this book. And I wonder, I don't know, I was talking to a friend about this the other day, about how, every single time I open up Instagram and there's people messaging me about their own pain, and then I'm starting to think about my pain, and then I'm thinking about the world's pain. It's like we're almost scratching this wound that we thought was healed over and over again. So I don't know, it's tricky, because as much as I love getting this out there, it's also, how much can I live in this space without kind of diving back into that deep, dark place again? Does that make sense?
Totally. I completely agree.
Yeah. Sorry, go on, Kirstie.
No, Karen, would you like to talk on that?
I think about this all the time, and I've been thinking about it the past couple of days when I was reading your book. And that's because I was surprised at how sad I felt when I read your book, even though it's so delicately done, and it's good stuff, and it's not surprising to me, much of it, but there is something to it, thinking about it, spending time in it, and realizing many of these things are kind of too bad to be able to be at peace with. There isn't really a good way to find, there's no comfortable solution we can really get to, I think. So for me, I really have to curate, that's maybe not the right word, control what I let into my daily life. And I think for you, Lucia, also, your work is just lethal to read for me. I don't know how you do it. Because it's so good, and I'm so thankful that you do it. Thank God. But I have to, what you said, Jessica, in your book about watching nice TV shows, and I have to limit the amount of I can only answer messages from strangers about their pain, maybe a little part of the day, and I don't open, or I try not to open all the messaging apps at all times of the day and night, and I try to focus on other things. But then it's also hard because I'm writing about similar stuff. Sometimes I feel like I try to write about other themes, and then I end up back in the gutter of chronic illness again. So I mean, I wish I had a solution, wish I could say that I have arrived at a perfectly balanced place, but it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucia, did you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, well, thank you both for what you just said. It's so tricky. I mean, it's one of these things, like everything about chronic illness, is that, yeah, we kind of are always taught that recovery is linear, but when you have an illness that's permanent, actually, you just kind of keep circling around the same things again and again. And, you know, which I always thought of as a failure. But now I'm kind of starting to see it as a process. And I say that because my mindset changes so much in terms of what I can handle, what I can take in, what I can't. And it does seem like that kind of cyclical process where I'm kind of going through a cycle of grief and loss and acceptance, and then hope, and then grief and loss and acceptance again. And that idea was so strange to me at the beginning of all of this, because I kind of just thought, I have to get better and then this will be over, rather than, you know, my approach to this will relapse and remit in the same way that the condition does. And so I'm kind of learning, I'm not good at this yet, but learning to kind of judge where I am in those kind of cycles to see how much I can expose myself to. But, you know, it's just another part of, it's just more work, you know, it's more work that we have to do, that we shouldn't really have to do. And in a way, even that is exhausting, you know, trying to understand your own limits about how much you can talk to other people about their pain, and how much time you can spend writing and thinking about pain is, you know, is a whole other layer of kind of tiring work. And another thing I think about, this is in a more kind of societal way, but I think about this a lot with these kinds of issues, because I don't know about you guys, but when people, particularly women, write about suffering, there is this idea attached to it that it is somehow cathartic or kind of wholly beneficial for the person who's doing it. Like that it's kind of a self-it, you know, there's this idea that's like, oh, this is just your diary, or like, you know, this is something that you're doing for yourself. And people, you know, I've had interviews where people say, you know, so writing this book, was it like therapy? And like Jessica said, no, like I was much better before I wrote the book. The book is why I go to therapy, you know, like, and it's all work kind of to go into these emotions all the time and do this research. And that's just something that, you know, really frustrates me. And I think it's another important thing to kind of combat in our kind of collective imagination of these things, like that this is work. It's not something that we do for fun, and it's not something that we do for catharsis.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That brings me to my next question. Jessica, in your book, you write about, you say that if you're a person living with endometriosis, caring for yourself needs to be your #1 priority. So I wanted to ask about how writers living in a world obsessed with productivity, you know, always getting the next byline, publishing the next piece. How do you take care of yourselves and have a writing and a creative practice, and then also, you know, find that balance with actually taking care of your body and living with your condition?
Do you want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Well, I just have really gotten good at, you know, for instance, I have a son that is 6, and my husband and him have a hotel. I'm clearly obsessed with hotels, but they have a hotel night once a week or once a month where they leave me alone in the house and they go. And I think that I just have become very vocal about what I need to take care of myself. And I don't think it's selfish, because I know that during that time alone, and I like being alone before having a child and before having a husband, I just need to be alone. So, you know, and I think I feel very fortunate that I have friends and family that understand that, but I don't know how it would be, or maybe I wouldn't be married to someone that didn't understand that, because I think people think that when you need that time for yourself, that means that you don't want them, and it has nothing to do with them. It's to protect yourself. So I don't know, maybe I'm bratty about it or too vocal, but I just have gotten really good at saying, actually, I don't want to do that, or actually, I need to be alone right now. I have a very expensive sauna blanket that I bought. I'm going to be in this watching some Netflix. I'll see you guys later. But yeah, I just, it's probably only been in the last 10 years when I started changing my life with tools and things that I was able to say no, or I was able to say, yes, this is my time.
That's really wonderful. I love the idea of a hotel night. That's really great. Karen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Again, I wish I could say that I've solved it perfectly, but I think maybe this is something that should be talked about more, that choosing the right partner makes a huge impact on your life. And I'm lucky that mine thinks that my work is really important, and I think he takes some pride in contributing to making it possible, which he really, really does. So he can kind of help me minimize my health problems in many ways, and help get the stuff that is hard for me to do done. And so we find ways to be sort of seamlessly helping each other. Of course, that goes for any partnership. And it's, I think, the key to having a good partnership, no matter if you are disabled or not, or who you date. Otherwise, I kind of consider myself disabled. I mean, I have other illnesses in addition to endometriosis, and I don't have a daytime job, so I can write, and I basically spend a lot of my time taking care of my health, like doing many of the things that Jessica writes about in her book, and like finding the exact balance of how much exercise, how much alone time, how much vegetables can I manage, like how much is beneficial of every little thing. And also what I mentioned earlier, like making sure to try to focus on allies and good and beautiful things and enjoyable things, which is hard to do sometimes. But I think, and I need to be better at that too, or like not better at it, but yeah, I wish I were.
That's lovely. Lucia, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, just quickly, I wanted to say as well, the issue about relationships and kind of any intimacy, whether that's romantic or platonic or within your family, becomes so difficult when you get sick. And both Karen and Jessica's books deal with this so well. And again, like we said at the beginning, Karen's book deals with this in a kind of really close way with her protagonist, and I've never seen that in fiction before. So I just wanted to say, if anyone wants to read an account of that kind of negotiation with intimacy and illness, both of these books do that so well. And
thank you.
And Jessica, the part of your book that is about kind of reassessing your idea of caring for yourself, but it's not really the part of the book. In some ways, it's kind of the bedrock of the book. And I loved that so much, because the way that you framed it was, and I think this is true in every part of your book, is you framed it in a way that can be helpful for anyone, no matter what stage of their journey they're at. And one of the things that really resonated with me, which I hope I don't do so much anymore, but certainly was me maybe even 12 months ago, this idea that if you can't put yourself first for yourself, think about it as putting yourself first for the people that you love, because you will be a better friend and partner and soulmate and person in the world if you are able to be well. And there was a time when that really was the only way I could think about taking care of myself, was for the sake of other people. And then I think by doing that, you allow yourself to see yourself almost like someone that you love, and it gives you this new perspective. And now I am able to say no to things. And I love the way you put this, Jessica, yes to being on my own or doing what I need to do, and not having people remain in my life who can't handle that. And it was just really nice, Jessica, in the book to see the kind of the spectrum of that journey, you know, all the different parts of learning to take care of yourself in illness. There are so many stages to it, and no matter where you're at in that journey, you know, it's so important to sit down and think, you know, how do I feel about taking care of myself, and how can I put myself first a bit more today, or this hour, or whatever.
I think what you've just said really touches upon the idea that Jessica outlines in her book about, Jessica, you talk about giving up on the quest for perfect health and how that's sort of a liberating moment, and how you try to move towards celebrating your endo wins, which I thought was really great and so important for readers to learn. I felt this personally, to stop feeling so much anger towards my body and develop a sort of conversation with it and listen to it and understand that this is my normal, this is my good day. And be okay with that, and be at peace with that. And I think that was a really quite a important argument that you make in your book, for me anyway.
Thanks. I mean, it's hard to do that some days, right? Because I mean, I think so much we compare ourselves to people that don't have endo. So it's like when we see people online going to yoga and then running a marathon and then eating a bowl of spaghetti, and if you did all of those things in one day, you'd be completely wiped out. So we just compare ourselves so much. And so I really don't feel like I really started to manage my endo as well as I am doing it now until I defined what my best was. And sadly, my best might be someone else's worst, but it's my best. And it's hard. It's hard sometimes to get to that place of acceptance. But I think if we can get there at least a little bit, it can really change our mindset a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. And that touches on what Lucia mentioned in her reading about the language of combat and it being a battle and a fight. And I think to be able to sit with your body in a much more generous and empathetic way, as your whole book argues, Jessica, is really, I think that's quite radical. And I think it's such a valuable tool for endometriosis sufferers. It's very important work. So I'm really excited that it's out in the world now.
Thanks. I just am so grateful to be with all of these smart writers. It's like, I mean, it's just so great. Thank you.
Not at all. It's great to have you all here. And I have one final question for everyone tonight before we wrap up. I wondered how you think the future is looking for endometriosis care, and do you think the next generation will get better care than our generation has gotten?
I will just say quickly that the thought I had again and again while reading your book, Jessica, was how different my life would have been if I had it 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And for that reason alone, I would say yes to that question, because we do have books like this in the world now. And really, that is radical. You know, like, this is a really big, important shift, I think. Yeah. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I feel more and more, I mean, I'm sometimes such a cynical person and sometimes hopelessly optimistic, and I feel like I have no middle ground. But I do think that there are a lot of signs that progress is being made. You know, there's a lot of better research being done and a lot more compassion being given to sufferers, I think. Yeah. So, and as I said, again, just like outside of being able to access doctors, be taken seriously by doctors, pay for healthcare, pay for alternative care, all of that. Just the fact that there's a book like Know Your Endo, which you can just have in your hands, and it can help you kind of understand how to and help you manage your life. Like, I think that will change a lot of things for the generation that comes up next.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I also have a mix of optimism and extreme pessimism. But I was talking to a doctor who does research on adenomyosis, and she was saying how there is a kind of generational shift happening in the researchers. And she was doing this great work now of bringing together all the different research. I don't have the scientific vocabulary for this, on adenomyosis, or like creating a list of things that would be included in all the research going forward, which would make all the research so much more useful. And that made me feel kind of hopeful. And I also agree, like the fact that these books are out there and they're, yeah, it really makes a difference.
And AIC exists. I mean, AIC didn't exist when I like, hung out with Riot Girls and stuff and made zines, but we didn't really talk about periods as much. And, it was sometimes as much as I'm sort of on like TikTok and things like that. I mean, these young girls are talking about endometriosis. They actually know the word.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that is just to know the word is a huge advancement for the next generation. And then to know the symptoms is the second. And so I am really hopeful. I really am.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Just getting the word out there. That's just a huge leap. And just making readers feel like, patients feel like they're not alone, because they're not, because these wonderful books are out there and, people care and are listening. So I think it's really, the progress is happening, I feel like. Yeah. Well, that's it for us tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. It's been absolutely wonderful hearing you read and discuss your work. And I just want to thank you all for being so open as well. We spoke about quite personal, some difficult things, and I just think I really value your honesty and your wonderful writing. So thank you so much. To all the attendees, please do buy these books. They are absolutely brilliant, and you can find them in the Eventbrite description page. They're all on there. All the links are on there. And please do follow our writers on social media. Follow their work. They're doing really brilliant things.
I'm taking a picture of us all.
Okay.
Oh yeah, good.
I'll do a picture too real quick.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much
This
for
is
having
really
us.
great.
Thank you, Jessica, for having us launch your book with you.
Oh
It's
my
very
gosh,
nice.
thank you.
What an honor.
And thank you, Kirstie, for everything. Thank you for having us. Thank you for AIC. Thank you for all your work.
Yeah,
Thank you, guys. I'm going to cry. Thank you.
I've been low-key crying the whole time. So.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I always do these things. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to...
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.